If you're buying an investment property in the next 12 months, there are 4 property types I'd be very, very careful with. Because the wrong first property can kill your portfolio before it even starts. It can stop you from building equity, make it harder to borrow again, and leave you stuck with a property that technically rents but never really actually grows. After helping Australians buy close to 1,000 investment properties, these are the mistakes I have seen all the time. We're going to look at the real situations where investors get caught, including what to look for, what to ignore, and when the problem might be big enough to walk away with. So today, I'll show you 4 property types I would seriously question before signing anything. Number 1, the cheap property that just gets you started. The first property I'd be very, very careful with is the cheap property that just gets you started. It's like the girl or guy at the bar at 3 a.m. that is the easiest option. This is common when you want to buy your first investment property, but you don't want to put too much money into it. So you look for the cheapest possible property. That still lets you say, I'm in the market, and logically that makes sense. Unfortunately, it can also come around to bite you in the ass. I know this all too well. Early in my property investing journey, I bought a 1-bedroom apartment in Brunswick for $255,000. At the time, it felt like a smart first investment property. It was affordable, it was in Melbourne, it was in an area that I understood, and most importantly, it meant I was finally in the property market. That felt good for my ego. 8 years later though, I sold it for $275,000. So after almost a decade, the property had only increased in value by $20,000. And once you factor in buying costs, selling costs, holding costs, strata fees, and everything else that came along with owning that apartment, I lost money. My brother and I bought another apartment together for around $275,000, and we later sold that property at roughly $20,000 lost. Luckily, I was 18 years old, so I had time to dust myself and do it properly. So yes, I owned investment properties, but they had not created meaningful capital growth. They had not built enough equity, and they had not helped me build a property portfolio. That is the danger. Cheap can feel safe at the start, but if the property doesn't grow, it can cost you years, like a really bad hangover. Number 2 is the property you emotionally want to live in. The next property I'd be super, super careful with is the one you emotionally want to live in. Poor Carl, who is behind this camera right now, had a version of this. He goes home after hearing all these wonderful things about property investing, says to his lovely wife, right, let's buy an investment property. Then they look at the first option straight away and she says, I can't picture myself living there. It's a bit old. The town feels small. It's only 1 bathroom and where's the ensuite? And honestly, that reaction is kind of pretty normal. We see this with clients all the time. One person might be looking at the property as an investment asset while their partner is looking at it like a home. They're picturing whether they would live there, whether the kitchen feels nice, whether the bathroom is too old, whether the area feels exciting enough, and whether it matches the kind of house they would choose for themselves to actually live in. But that is where investors can get caught, because you're not buying your dream home. You're buying an investment asset, purely numbers. That's it. So the question is not, would I live here? The question has to be, is this a quality asset that can deliver the returns that I need? That does not mean the house itself does not matter. It absolutely does. Of course it does. A good kitchen, a clean bathroom, new floors, well-presented home can make the property easier to rent, help attract better tenants, reduce vacancy risk, and sometimes improve the rental yield. But as soon as you know the house is not the main game, the land is, over time, the building gets older, the kitchen dates, the bathroom wears out, and the floor looks like Clint Eastwood's testicles. But the land is usually where the long-term capital growth comes from. This is where you have to get past, whether you personally like the property, because some of the best investment properties we buy for clients aren't flashy at all. They're simple 3-bedroom homes in a strong area with a plain kitchen, 1 bathroom, and low maintenance finishes. Like Carl behind the camera, nothing particularly exciting, but the asset works. For example, one client's property was bought for around $450,000, it had a rental yield of 4.5% and cost roughly $10,000 a year to hold. So on the surface, this is not some glamorous dream home, but over the next 12 months, that property increased in value by roughly 20%. So it went from $450K to $550K, which is $100,000 in capital growth. And now that investor may have the option to use that equity to now rinse and put into another investment property. That is the game. Not whether you love the kitchen, not whether you would live there, but whether the asset delivers capital growth, creates equity, and helps you continuing to build your property portfolio. So the rule here is simple. Do not buy an investment property like a homeowner, buy it like an investor. Which brings me to point number 3, the property with defects you don't understand. The third property I'd be very, very careful with is the property with defects that you actually just don't understand. But like Carl behind the camera, Not every defect is bad. That is not how property works. If you buy an existing house, especially something 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, the building and pest report is almost always going to show problems. That is the whole point of the report. It is there to protect you as the buyer, so it is going to list the moisture readings. It is going to list the roof issues, the old switchboards, the corrosion, the timber damage, the drainage problems, the loose fittings, the broken appliances, and everything else the inspector can find. The mistake is when people go too far in either direction. Some investors see a building and pest report, panic, walk away from a perfectly good investment property over issues that could have been easily negotiated or fixed through the sales process. Others do the opposite. They don't even bother getting the property inspected, or they ignore the report, buy the property anyway, and then only later realise they've taken on a much bigger problem than they initially understood. Both can cost you money and unfortunately put your portfolio in a sleeper hold. This is where you need to know the difference between a normal defect, a negotiable defect, and a genuine walk away issue. A bit of a corrosion near the coast might be normal depending on how serious it is. A bathroom with a moisture reading might need a reseal, or it might be hiding a bigger waterproofing issue. A roof with capping problems might be manageable, or it might be a much larger repair. An old switchboard might be working today, but it may become a problem if you need to add more appliances or split systems later. Termites are another really, really good example. If there are inactive termites in the back of a fence or a tree, that might not automatically kill the deal. But if those little sons of bitches have damaged inside the house, especially where it is affecting the timber, the walls, the flooring, a garage, or structural parts of the property, make like a tree and get out. In one of our recent podcast conversations, we talked about properties with termite damage that we have purchased, properties we have walked away from, and one example where termites in the garage were serious enough that we walked away because the risk was too high. That is the level of difference we are talking about. Not every issue means run, but some issues absolutely need to be understood before you sign off. So if a building and pest report comes back with 40 defects, the answer is not to panic and ask for all 40 things to be fixed. That is how you lose the property, especially in a competitive market. The better approach is to understand the entire report, speak to the building and pest inspector, get quotes where you need them, then focus on the defects that actually matter. That might mean asking for money off, asking the vendor to fix certain items, accepting the issue because the risk is manageable, or walking away completely. But you should not be making that decision based on fear. You should be making it based on evidence. Because a poor quality asset can destroy your return. A roof that needs major works can cost you tens of thousands of dollars. A failed bathroom waterproofing issue can turn into a full renovation. A termite problem in the wrong part of the house can become a nightmare. A pool that hasn't been checked properly can become a very, very expensive liability. And if you do not understand what you're looking for, you can either walk away from a good deal or buy into a bad one. A building and pest report is not a personality test. You do not need to fall in love with it. You just need to know whether the problems are fixable, negotiable, or about to financially king hit you in the car park. Brings me to number 4, the cookie cutter property with too much competition. The fourth property I'd be very careful with is the cookie cutter property with too much competition. And you probably already know what this one is. These are properties in massive housing estates where they just keep building. Those Lego cities, they keep buying up nearby farmland, murder all the cauliflower living there and put up another 100 houses on it. They rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. The problem is simple. There is no real scarcity. If there is an endless amount of similar land, similar houses, and similar floor plans, it becomes very, very hard for your property to stand out. And quite often, especially here in Victoria, the infrastructure around these big housing developments, they're complete shit shows. You might have one road in and one road out, limited public transport, not enough schools, not enough shops, not enough employment nearby, and a bunch of empty machete bins. So even though the property is new, and even though it might feel safe because it is a big development, it may not actually be a strong investment asset. Ballarat is a perfect example of how we think about this. On the outer edges, you can find brand new houses in brand new housing estates with 4-bedroom, a double garage, 2 or 3 bathrooms, a main bedroom with an ensuite, stone benchtop, stainless steel appliances, and all the bells and whistles. Then closer into town, you might find an old brick veneer home with 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a single garage, an older kitchen and an older bathroom. Nothing flashy. And emotionally, a lot of investors look at those two and think the new one is the better buy. But from an investment point of view, the older property may actually be the stronger asset because the new house can be surrounded by hundreds of similar homes with more land still being released around it. That means more supply, more competition, and less scarcity. Whereby the older home in an established part of Ballarat may have a better access to schools, shops, transport, employment, and lifestyle. It may also have stronger appeal to future owner-occupiers. So when we were buying in that region, we were much more interested in the established parts of Ballarat itself, not because the houses were prettier, but because there was more scarcity. And when it eventually came time to sell, there was likely to be stronger demand from the owner-occupiers who actually wanted to live in that location. Generally, people want to buy in a nice established area with access to schools, shops, transport and lifestyle, not on the edge of a massive housing estate where there are hundreds of similar properties around them. That is what can make the established property easy to sell and a lot of the time more valuable over time. That is the question, not which property has the nicer kitchen, but which property has better scarcity, capital growth potential and resale demand. The other version of this is buying in a large, dense apartment area. If there are already hundreds of apartments nearby and your research shows very, very high vacancy rates for apartments in that market, that's just a serious warning sign. When you go to rent it out, tenants have options. And when you go to sell, buyers have options. This is especially risky with big off-the-plan apartment buildings. If you own one apartment in a building with hundreds of similar apartments, your value can be heavily influenced by what everyone else does. If 4 or 5 owners drop their price because they need to sell, instantly, that affects the perceived value of yours. And unlike a house with land, you have very, very little control. You cannot add value to the land. You cannot build a granny flat. You cannot knock it down and rebuild. You cannot meaningfully change the asset. You're relying on the market to absorb all of that supply. Now, this does not mean that apartments never work. Most of our research shows that apartments in big capital cities are very hard to make work as strong growth investments. But occasionally, units can work well in regional markets where they are genuinely scarce and there is a strong demand. So again, the point is not simply apartments are bad, houses are good. The point is supply and demand. If there are too many similar properties, too much supply, high vacancy rates, and weak infrastructure, I would be very, very careful because you're not just buying a property, you're buying into a supply problem. So the rule here is simple. Do not buy in a market where they can keep building more of the same thing. Buy where there is limited supply and genuine demand. So, those are the 4 property types I'd be very, very careful of buying. The cheap property that just gets you started, the property you emotionally see yourself living in, the property with defects you do not understand, and the cookie cutter property where your Amazon deliveries will always get stolen. Carl's already nervous because he lives in one of these, but we'll deal with that after filming, all right, brother? None of these are automatically bad in every situation, but if you buy them for the wrong reason, they can cost you years. Because a good investment property is not just cheap, new or nice to look at. It needs to deliver capital growth, create equity, have strong rental demand, and have strong resale demand when you eventually say it's time to sell. So now that you know what to avoid, the next question is, where should you actually buy? Because avoiding the wrong property is like avoiding food poisoning. Great start, but it does not mean you've picked a good restaurant. So in the next video, I will show you how to identify a growth location before it becomes obvious, including the population signs we look for, the infrastructure signals, the supply and demand data, and the rental market pressure, and the signs of a location may be about to move before everyone else starts talking about it. Because once you know what not to buy, the next step is knowing where to buy. I'll see you on that video. To your success.